like Anthropic or OpenAI get to that data, I'm going to put it out there and say, like, I hope not. Like, if we're stupid enough to give those companies, access to health records, to give them the opportunity to do that, we are absolute idiots. But would someone like, an Eli Lilly, who runs long-term trials, who Hey, everybody, it's Costas.
Hi, it's Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE. And this is the time for the June roundup. I know we're a little bit late. We're kind of pretty far into July, actually. But again, to help us out is our always friendly and lovely guest, Alex Dickinson from the Geonomics podcast. So welcome again, Alex, to help us out here for the June roundup.
Thank you, sir. Great to be here.
Awesome. So tons of things happen just because we're a little bit delayed here. So that means we're into July as well. So we guys have tons of just events happening in the world, around the world of life sciences, biotech, so tons to go through. But Alex, maybe you could start us off because I know you were in a little trip is it in California? I forgot if it was in California or not, but the TD Cowen sort of Tools and Diagnostics Revolution Conference, or at least I don't know if it's a conference. I think it was only invite only, so they must have missed their invite to myself and Costas. But Alex got to go.
Yeah, they're incredibly rude. And I don't go to conferences usually, but I had the advantage of it. It's only about 5 minutes from my house, so I was able to zip in and out. And I was on a panel there. It's their annual event, and it's a combination of VCs, C-level folks from companies they invite in, and folks from some of the very largest companies as well, the public companies, and a good mix of folks from diagnostics and pharma, and obviously those two are tied together. And the main themes, I felt like there were, for me anyway, there weren't any like aha moments. Actually, there was one, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that later, and it's about the what's going on with some of the bigger drug companies. But the focus there was very much on MRD, as you would expect. I saw more and more, reinforcement of what's been concerning me in MRD, which is now the tests are getting very capable, and a lot of it is oncologists getting comfortable with the tests and knowing what to do. You see the advanced cancer centers. I remember being at another meeting where the docs there were going, they use MRD all the time, like 24/7, like crazy people. But regular doctors, regular oncologists, community oncologists, they're not using it much at all because it's just starting to be written into the NCCN guidelines. So everyone's recognizing that as a significant barrier right now. On the MCED front, that was interesting. People have just started talking about 2028, just referencing the year. And it's because the reimbursement under the Nancy Sewell Act kicks in on the 1st of January 2028, get around $600 reimbursed from the US government for an MCED test. And so there's a lot of focus now on that. Who's going to get in, what the test requirements are going to be. It's really starting to, as you would expect, drive a lot of interest from the community in that testing. Obviously, Grail Gallery is seen as the front runner there, but a lot of companies, Abbott just bought Exact, which has an MCED test, methylation test. It's starting to get some really kind of mainstream interest and focus with that kind of level of reimbursement. Basically the possibility that everyone in the US on Medicare, which is 65 and over, would get an annual cancer test reimbursed at $600. You can already see $30 billion or something like that of revenue right out of the gate. So it's got everyone's attention.
Wow. And actually, speaking about just MCED, maybe taking, I think I was a little bit too early on that train. I thought MCED was going to take over in last year, so it's at least a year, if not like 2 years behind. But speaking about that is around the idea that there's, quite a few diagnostic companies, obviously in 2021 were all-time highs in their market caps and valuations, and now they have actually, then there was the big, let's say, readjustment. They went down like 90%, at least 70%, if not 90% in terms of market cap. Now, at least companies like Guardant, companies like Natera, even like we just talked about Abbott, who purchased um, what was the
Exact.
company? Exact, yes. So they purchased Exact. Now almost all of them are back at roughly all-time highs. Maybe they dropped down a
Hmm.
bit more, right? But they're out of the 2021, back to close to 2021 highs. So maybe a question here is this time different? Are they more fairly evaluated now, or is it just again a lot of money sloshing in, or is there something different that's structurally different this time now that these companies are back at close to all-time highs in terms of market cap?
I
Maybe
think
start with
it's.
you, Alex. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I didn't jump in ahead, Costa. Sorry. It's driven, in my opinion, by MRD, right? That even though that market is only about, I think, about 5% penetrated, um, it's driven. Natera's now got twice the market cap of Illumina. It's just a real business. There's real value in the test. The medical community likes it and will steadily go through, as they should be, pretty conservative about adopting new technologies. That's just a growth business. And then you've got MCED out there as the next possible big thing. Not confirmed, but it gives you kind of a double growth story, right? MRD going gangbusters sort of in the clinical, and the possibility or the probability that MCED is going to do very well in the kind of more direct to consumer reimbursed market, I think means that it is. I mean, who knows? Not giving investment advice. So I'm not saying it's not a bubble. It might be a bubble within a bubble, but I think there's a good case to be made that it's much more robust than that previous bubble.
Got it. With those drivers, Costas, do you think that there's something beyond just purely the test itself that generates revenue, right? What I mean by that is these tests like MRD, like the early cancer screening, that you're actually getting more information. That information now is extra data that could potentially be used as fuel for the next generation of, I don't know, AI training data sets, right? Well, how do you think about it that way, Costas? Is there more to the story than just purely revenue from the tests, do you believe?
Yeah, no, look. I don't think it's about driving next generation development. I really do think it is the tests themselves and the value that is being seen. So MRD, I think, is a clear one. It allows medical decision making, and that's always been the bar for a lot of these tests. When you're providing incremental, marginal incremental information, your uptake and then your long-term value, no matter how slick and intellectual the test is, it just doesn't make that much of a difference in the clinic. It's not going to really make that much of a difference to your bottom line. I think especially MRD makes that kind of a difference. I think MCED, I think we've seen some over the last couple of months, some mixed data that has come out about their real ability to identify cancers earlier, especially. So I'm not on that board yet. At some point, they'll catch up, but I don't think they are there yet. They are the promise. They're maybe where MRD was back in 2019, 2020, somewhere around there. MRD is really the one, as Alex sort of fleshed it out. You have a path to reimbursement. You have, acceptance. You have guidelines being written. This is the solid path to profitability for these tests, and I think that's what people are recognizing, that that this is here and now, and then maybe the investments that they put in, previously, were just they were just far too aggressive, and they're just starting to understand. It's no different than like a drug. There are phases, things, milestones you have to hit before you're going to see that profitability. So it's just really a realignment of expectations. I think that's all it is.
And actually, may change. Actually, we probably should define what I forgot we should have done this. Is probably should define what MRD is and MCED first. Maybe let's go to you for that, our resident diagnostic expert, Alex. So could you define MCED and then MRD just because the billions of people out there probably don't necessarily know what that actually even means.
Sure. MRD is minimum residual disease, and it is used after patients have been treated initially for their cancer to monitor for reemergence of the cancer. So it's kind of a needle in a haystack problem. They will usually take a tumor sample and get the fingerprint of that specific patient's cancer, create a custom or bespoke test for that person's cancer, and then regularly come back and check them for it. And it's super interesting, as Costa says, the doctors, it's huge for two reasons. One's obvious, right, which is it's useful if cancer is coming back because it causes you to be able to start treating it earlier. The traditional methodology for solid tumors is do scans at regular intervals and look for signs of tumor formation off the scans. And the clinical trials are demonstrating anywhere from a few months to maybe 18 months or longer detection of recurrence of cancer prior than it would have appeared if you'd just done a scan. So it's really valuable in terms of getting an early signal. But it raises all sorts of challenges about, what's the doctor meant to do when they get a positive hit on an MRD? If it's not in the guidelines, should I start the old chemo I was giving the patient? Should I be looking at new ones? And then the surprising thing to me is when a patient finds out that they are clear of cancer, of course, they're very happy. But it also means they often want a reduction in the therapy they might be receiving, right? And then imagine that's a real risky decision for a doctor. It's like, well, I don't know, Alex doesn't want to take his chemo anymore, and I understand why he doesn't, but what if the cancer comes back? It's kind of my fault because I took him off the chemo. So, you can certainly see why it takes some time. And then MCED is multi-cancer early detection, and it's kind of there's already single cancer early detection, and there the idea, particularly for colonoscopy, is a lot of people don't like the idea of colonoscopy. They prefer to do a blood test, and this is or a stool test or a blood test. So there's been single cancer alternatives, but they're moving more and more to blood because a lot of people don't want a stool test. They like a blood test. So you've got a bunch of entrants into that area. And then multi-cancer is the idea that it should be, I'd like to be able to extend that, not just colon cancer, but look for all the cancers, right? Grail Gallery claims to detect 50 cancers from a blood test. And so that's very different. It's not going to be driven by the doctors. It's really being driven by the patients. Well, they're not even patients yet, right? It's driven by people who are concerned they'll get cancer and would like the idea of knowing they were cancer-free. And it's an interesting topic for discussion, but it's so different to MRD, which is being driven by the oncologists, and it's like being carefully tailored into how the care is happening. The problem with MCED is Alex will go order an MCED test from Gallery. I'll get a positive test back, and I'll go see my doctor and go, I don't know. I got the Gallery test that says I might have cancer. What are we going to do now? And that's a completely unaddressed issue in the medical community, in payer communities. Nobody knows. There'll be like some vague sense that there's some higher probability that Alex might have cancer. But then what the medical community is meant to do with it, I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing you talked about around the idea of just a blood test being more, just do people have a propensity more likely to take a blood test for say early cancer detection versus say like even compared to like say a stool test, right? Like I can kind of understand why you don't want a colonoscopy. I mean, but that like we'll leave that to the imagination, right? I can understand that piece, but people would rather actually take a blood test than a stool test, which I found really kind of interesting because I guess there's some sort of like ick factor with like the stool. And actually, to kind of dovetail this into a slightly separate topic, but I was recently at a conference called Bio International. So it's like blind date thing for like the biotech industry, right? Costas has been to it, right? Huge conference, tons of people there, just lots of movement. And one of the individuals on a panel said that they were incredibly surprised by the uptake of the various GLP-1 drugs because when they first came out, they were injectables. That was apparently a very,
Mm.
very just not a thing that people like that was a bar that was a high bar for adoption, right? Costas may be able to speak to more about this, but that seems to be not the case. Like people are just jumping on the GLP-1, GLP kind of bandwagon. And of course, there are companies that benefit a lot from it, like namely like Eli Lilly and the folks over at Novo Nordisk as well that are just literally printing money. But Costas, I mean, when you were at the various your former biopharma hat on, was that just a completely no go when something had to be injectable back in the day? Like why is this such a big draw?
You know what, it used to be a no-go, and then we went from oral pills to for different inflammation related disorders, rheumatoid arthritis for example, to infusions, and then back to injections. And that was like the scene as like, well, at least it's not a 20-30 minute infusion, to orals, so we've kind of like almost primed the market. And I'm going to give you, and I think this particular market is unique, right? So you had people who were coming in as diabetics, so that was the initial introduction to the market. They're a little bit more accepting, I think, of the
Mm. Mm.
interventions. But I'll go one step further and just recount a story from my PhD years. So I actually worked in obesity, and I was doing some quality of life testing with individuals. And I had this one gentleman who came in, and this is at a time when the only two products on the market were sibutramine, which was a fen sort of distant cousin, right? So these anorexant agents. And then the other product in the market was by Roche at the time, orlistat, right? So what did it do? It suppressed the ability of your gut to ingest fats, and so there are some very unpleasant side effects if your body cannot actually ingest fats. And this guy went into deep detail about all of these different things. I asked, we looked at the questionnaire at the end, and he actually came out as like, it's not so bad quality of life. I've lost a lot of weight. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I couldn't breathe going up the stairs before. He's like, now I know to put down that hot dog. Like his words, not mine. he was a very animated gentleman, but honestly, like the there's, I think, a difference in the perspective of what the payoff is for a patient who's looking at obesity, versus what a patient who has, I don't even want to say type 2 diabetes, or, when a skin care disorder or whatever. I mean, it's a fundamentally different patient population, and what they're willing to do in order to achieve that weight loss, I think is very different, because even if you can get past the injections, the side effects are still largely GI. So you are still having to put up with some unpleasant things, and that is seen by a lot of people as a better alternative to what they were living with before. So yeah, it's a different world, Lester. It's a completely different world.
That's super fascinating. So this is something that you probably completely saw. You're like injectable. Oh, that's not even like that big of a thing. Given this gentleman had he was willing to go through arguably a lot worse, and maybe that speaks to why Eli Lilly is now the most valuable pharmaceutical company in the world. I think their market cap don't correct me if I'm wrong here. It may actually be the combination of the other 9 of the top 10 probably equate to roughly what their market cap is, which is I think over $1 trillion now, right? And they're just printing out money, and they are recently going on a buying spree, right, Costas? So I think Alex, you said that at the TD Cohen conference, you are, or at least invite only conference, that there are folks from the pharmaceutical industry over there, and maybe you can give your perspective on that front, and then Costas will
That
have a
was
conversation about Eli Lilly. But so go ahead, Alex.
yet, and not being in that industry, I was super interested in how they think about it and how they describe the problem, which it would be true of any business, I guess. But when you have an incredible success like this, your revenue's gone through the roof, and the market rewards growth. And so then they look at when are the patents going to run out on the GLP-1 drugs, and I'm sure they'll have, let's call them, innovations on GLP-1 for weight loss and so on. But also, what are all the other things, right? What are all the other ways they might find drugs? And it was really emphasized that those guys are on a crazy buying spree right now because they have so much money. So they have a problem, which is where's the revenue come from in 5, 10, 15 years? And they have a huge advantage, which is they have money overflowing their coffers. And so it was just interesting to see how they think about it.
So Costas, putting back your pharma hat on, or former pharma hat on, the like, well, is it as simple as kind of at face value? I have tons of money. Speaking about Eli Lilly, I don't personally have nearly as much, of course, any close to that. But I have a problem. I need to generate more revenue. I have a ton of money right now. I'm going to leverage that capital to acquire organizations that to kind of feel the future of my pipeline. Is it as simple as that? As from a calculus perspective, is that when you're big pharma, is that kind of what you would think about?
So yes and no. I think number one, things have changed a little bit, because in the past it would be, let's throw money at making a slight improvement, and this becomes a follow-on product in a safe market. We own the market. We know the clinicians and the patients, so we just need to retain as much of it as we can, right? We've moved on from that model quite a while ago. Today, that concept of just going out and buying, whether it's an asset, and it's usually an asset, right? That is typically being bought. It's not companies, because I think we've talked about this before. There's a challenge in trying to sort of absorb into a large, especially a large multinational pharma, small, really innovative, companies. So that's usually not the case. It's usually assets. And then it really comes down to what's the culture of the company. When you get these really large, um, really conservative, conservatively governed companies, Eli Lilly would fall into that bucket. Like a J&J would fall into that bucket. Um, they take a little bit more of a conservative approach, and this is a very different approach than you would expect Eli Lilly to take. They've gone out and they've said, okay, we know we've got tons of cash rolling in right now. There's going to be a patent cliff that with a huge number that we're going to have to replace, or we will be punished in the market. And the way we have to do that is not just to make safe bets, it's to bet on what's the next big thing, right? So like, look at what they're going after. They're going after next generation vaccines, in vivo CAR T, ADCs with like dual effective endpoints. They are going after really what is the next generation, potentially, of with big bets. I would not have guessed that Eli Lilly would have been the one to do that, but they have the war chest to do that right now. And this speaks to a vision, I think, at that company, which is not how do we replace the GLP-1 revenue? It's how do we actually take this sort of running start that we've been given and actually just continue to build this momentum upwards beyond GLP-1. So they're thinking well beyond GLP-1, turning one or two or even three of these assets that they're taking, and they're not single assets. They're buying companies and they're buying platforms so they can yeah. So they're like for the in vivo CAR T, for example, they've got a lead asset. And I think it's multiple myeloma, but it, they can potentially turn that into a multitude of different targets, right? Once you have the platform that works, and they're doing that in a couple of different areas. So I find it absolutely fascinating taking this approach, and this particular company taking this approach. It's not one that I would have expected, but wow, hats off to them. They are making the best use of that they can right now with the war chest that they have.
Yeah, speaking about, just taking quite a almost like quite a big bet. Eli Lilly, not only are they investing in assets that are earlier in terms of their like development cycle, right? They're going even like earlier than some this groups that don't necessarily even have anything yet, right? So Eli Lilly has launched or developed something called TuneLab. I'm not sure if everyone out there is familiar with this, but what it is almost like Eli Lilly's AI platform. And the idea is that this AI platform of theirs, TuneLab, has been trained on their data set to understand chemistry, biology. And I believe the Eli Lilly's CEO, when he was on another podcast, his vision was, or at least the organization was, could we have almost an AI system platform that understands the human body? And that's kind of what he was talking about going after. And as a part of TuneLab, biotechs or smaller companies can be a part of that and leverage or use this AI platform. The only the only thing is any data that you produce that gets used and trained in your own system, but it's subsequently trained by trains TuneLab in their AI system. That is then subsequently retained by Eli Lilly as well. So that's really really far upstream. So maybe let me go over you, Alex, on this front, just because you come from a world of not just diagnostics but semiconductors in the past. This idea that Eli Lilly is developing this AI platform, then they're in the past been a more conservative organization. Is this something that you would have obviously Cost has suggested that he wouldn't have necessarily foresaw this, but what do you believe is the end game here for someone like an Eli Lilly that's doing this? What's the big bet here?
Well, I think it's manifold, but there's certainly the general sense that I mean everyone knows that market discovery is just incredibly experimental and random and difficult, and that if models can be built, AI models can be built that, for example, are able to predict the impact that a particular marker, either presence or lack of a marker, can have on a biological pathway and hence on cellular behavior and hence on disease behavior, that you could start to build drugs at a rate that has never been done before. And I think the real sign of the times, we were talking before we started today, is Anthropic. So Anthropic announced its science system, and it was interesting that its science system is really a biology system. So that's kind of the first tell. And then the second tell is that they have announced at the same time that they themselves are going to go into drug development. And so that's the business model here. It's like if you can in silico start generating markers that have a higher probability of getting through clinical trials and being both safe and having good efficacy, that's an extraordinarily profitable business model. And we've seen DeepMind spin out their version of this much earlier. And so I think as you look around, if you're an AI firm and you're thinking, what are all the vertical integrations we could do, right? And I guess the obvious one they've done already is coding. So it's like let's do coding, right? And that'll be a big business, and that turned out to be very much the case, right? And that's why Anthropic is ahead of OpenAI, because they went straight into the coding business instead of just more the OpenAI doing a kind of a consumer AI chatbot. And now everyone, I think, on the same side, they're going, well, if we have this extraordinarily capable source of intelligence, a great way to monetize it and a great thing to do is to develop drugs with it. And I've noticed a funny thing in my own. I work with Claude Code a lot, and nearly anything I do with it involves cancer or DNA or RNA. And the latest release, Fable, the one that got stopped and then came out, I can't use Fable at all. There's nothing of interest to me that I can use Claude Code for where I can use Fable, because it just says, nope, I won't do it. It's been so guardrailed around biology and anything to do with biology at all that it just is impossible to use, which is, I know it's partly a reaction to the US government and everything there, but I go, that's also kind of handy for them, since they just announced they're doing drug discovery and nobody else can use Fable to do drug discovery because it's quote unquote dangerous. That kind of works pretty well for them. And that's often the knock against Anthropic, which is their presentation of their purpose is to be cautious and responsible. But then the knock against that is, well, yeah, and that gives you an excuse not to release certain capabilities of your models. And one of them is anything that would have anything to do with drug development. Nobody else can use right now except them.
Yeah, let's go down that thread actually. It's not a podcast in 2026 if we don't like loop in AI into the conversation, right? It's like now, especially of course you almost have to. It's in everything, right? But it's in development for sure, and life sciences. It seems like both OpenAI and Anthropic super invested into this space, despite the entire software life science like revenue in 2025 was maybe somewhere like 10 billion, which is, it seems like a Tuesday for like OpenAI and Anthropic at this point in time, right? So according to Alex's, crystal ball, there's a grander plans for the, what they're trying to achieve, which is arguably to develop drugs into the future, right? So, Costas, maybe over to you. And now we're just playing the prediction game, like everyone else in some ways. Is
Yeah.
Alex brought up that both Claude or Anthropic and OpenAI, both of them figured out very early on that coding was a great use case. Primarily because obviously there's money in it, but the other component of it is like there's this self-improvement aspect of it, right? You can there's a test that you write code, you test it against something, and it's either right or wrong, and then you can loop back, and then you can improve, right, and so forth, right? Now, it kind of there is a similar aspect to that, I would argue, and say in biology and in treatments, right? Some of it's disease, does it treat disease? What is the outcome of treating disease? Of course, the timelines are like different. There's much more a lag, let's say, right? But I guess in the grand scheme of time, maybe that lag isn't really that big of a deal. So actually, think going down the line of recursive, like self-improvement and just be able to close that loop. Do you see groups like an Eli Lilly, like Anthropic, like a Claude try to close that loop with data from, like, let's say, real world data, real world evidence that we were down? If you see that happen, is that the okay, they are kind of going down that route? What do you think about that? Or is that unlikely? You think that they would try to go after organizations like that and like acquire real world data assets and real world evidence assets?
That is absolutely the missing piece. That is the massive difference between, what you can do with AI in other sectors and what you can't do with AI right now in life science, right? You need the outcome, and the outcome is not, can you make this molecule? Some of them you actually just can't. By the biology on paper looks great, but you just can't synthesize them. Okay, that's a low bar. Let's go even higher. Can you put it into human? Is it druggable? Okay, you can probably do that. Can you run clinical trials and show that it actually meets some sort of clinical outcome? Probably, yeah, absolutely. Can you get it through, authorized for use? Yeah, you probably can. All of these, from a theoretical perspective, you can. But unless you have the data that says, and this translates into better outcomes, you can't, like that. You haven't met the criteria for the investment, right? Because this all costs. I mean, we're not even going to. This is not a technical show. We're not going to get into tokens, i.e., the units of cost for utilizing AI for those of our listeners who maybe aren't that deep into it yet. But that cost is going to be huge, and unless you have the ultimate payoff, which is this type of molecule or these types of patients need to come together, and that results in a positive outcome or avoids a serious adverse event, that's what's going to be required. So will a company like Anthropic or OpenAI get to that data? I'm going to put it out there and say, like, I hope not. Like, if we're stupid enough to give those companies, access to health records, to give them the opportunity to do that, we are just absolute idiots. But would someone like, an Eli Lilly, who runs long-term trials, who sees the outcomes of patients, who has data from inception or discovery into the clinic, can someone like that actually have the full view and be able to utilize that to iterate back on their products and their discovery process? I think the answer there is yes. But again, I think the other difference is it's not just a tool, it's the understanding of how to use that tool and where the insights that come from that tool can actually be leveraged to accelerate development or to be able to be more selective in terms of what you choose to bring forward. So yeah, sorry, I dropped my
No,
little bomb there for a minute, but I can't see anyone other than, I think, those types of pharma companies really moving the needle on utilizing AI for discovery and development.
but when you just to clarify, when you say we'd be stupid to give that health records to OpenAI and Anthropic, by we, do you mean that, like, just the general population, like governments and so forth, or is it like
Society,
the pharma companies?
yeah,
Oh, society. Okay.
society. Why on earth they have again, go on the record here. They have stolen vast amounts of copyrighted material to be able to train their products, and we have stood back and not done anything. And we're going to give them the most precious information on individuals' health to further continue to train those products, to develop I think we can go down very dark pathways how they could monetize that information, and it doesn't all have to do with creating better diagnostics and better drugs. I think that we need to really, on a side note, on a policy note, we really need to continue to safeguard our own healthcare data from these institutions. And I mean, a drug company like Eli Lilly has to jump through hoops to be able to utilize this type of data and has to actually document what it's doing with it. Right? We place a pretty high burden on these companies. So anyone else needs to be meeting that high burden, and I don't. I think in other sectors we've given a pass to some of these technology companies, and I think we really need to be wary in the healthcare space.
Yeah, and this definitely is a future forward type of conversation we're having right here, Alex, from the diagnostic perspective, because in some ways diagnostics, like MRD, is giving you the outcome, right? Like, I mean, it's a surrogate endpoint, but it's somewhat you could, over time, maybe it's beyond just a surrogate. It's actually very, very much more predictive of, like, say, is the treatment working or not, right? Is it does in your when you're hearing the conversations at like a conference such as TD, Cohen, do some of these pharma companies think of that now and say, hey, you know what? In the past, they're like, hey, diagnostic, that's not us. Someone else will pay for that. But how organizations like, let's say, that should maybe you shouldn't name them, but like these very large pharmaceutical companies or even these AI companies with tons of money, or are they interested in buying a company, a diagnostic company? Because this way is almost like access to data that closes the loop for them to understand, hey, is this working or is this not working?
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's kind of a kind of classic example of that, which is Roche, right? Roche is about 130 years old, but in the 1950s they formed a diagnostic arm, and now it's a big business. They have a 16 billion a year diagnostic arm, and they themselves have just developed from some early acquisitions, have developed a sequencing system that's looking pretty promising. And but none of the I believe none of the other pharma companies has a diagnostic business, and so they're very unique in that aspect. I don't think that there has been really good examples to date of diagnostic companies being able to take the diagnostic business and turn it into a drug discovery business. It's always been a theory. When I was at Illumina, we were talking all the time. We were in the big data era, the 2010s, and boy, we're sequencing everything on the planet, and we should be able to do market discovery. And it really hasn't happened in a material way. And I think there's a sense at the moment that maybe AI will, a lot of people are betting that AI will enable that. And this ties into what Costas was saying. It's a super interesting issue about the intersection of market discovery and AI. One thing we know about the AIs we have is that they're really bad learners, right? And Jan LeCun is always saying, a 2-year-old wanders around and just from observing things, scenes, parents, it's a whole human brain. The whole AGI gets trained just from that. We have to take every single bite of information in all of human history and pass it through these AIs to get them to be smart, right? It's just like this overwhelming amount of data required. So that's just a fact about the nature of these systems. And there's a lot of debate philosophically about why that is. But it also says to train them from biology, we have to get a huge amount of information into them. And so at some theoretical level, you would think, well, the diagnostic companies and the tools companies should be in a great position to generate the data that will train these AIs. And that's becoming more and more kind of a business opportunity for tools companies. That's happening, but I wouldn't say it's happening at a, phenomenal rate. And there's still not really any sign that the AIs are going to get trained well off that information, or we don't know how much it's going to take or where it's going to come from. And then looping all the way back, Lester, to something you said at the start and pointing out the difference around coding, I think it's pretty well accepted that coding is like a perfect case for AIs because they can learn from experience about what works and what doesn't work. And straight away with a piece of code, like within a millisecond. Compile it, bam, did it work or didn't it work? And then it's completely different in healthcare, biology in general. And Costas, you went right through the sequence, right? You got a marker, boy, it's a possibility. And whether that comes out of a wet lab or comes in silico out of an AI, the lengths you have to go to work out if it's any good. First of all, does it kill the person or not? Second of all, does it impact it? Third of all, if it does impact it, does it involve a meaningful health outcome, right? Better quality of life, longer life. That process is infinitely long. And there's still no sign that the AIs are going to help with that. And that's in their learning path. So I'm very on the fence. I mean, I love it. I love the idea of AIs doing market discovery and so on. But both, where are we going to get the information to train them? And B, just the raw information, right? The so-called unsupervised part of it. But then the reinforcement learning part of it, like, oh no, that kills people, that doesn't. That is so slow and so error prone and so literally wet that I can easily see that this may be the hardest area to use. It's like to draw two extremes. You might go, you know what? The easiest area to apply them is coding. It may well be that the hardest area to apply them is biology.
Oh no, Costa, you're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, as you're mentioning that, Alex, I was even thinking, the data that they need to be fed needs to include um, things that are not often written down, right? They're
Recorded.
not captured, right? So, I'm thinking, there was a great example. I worked in the antipsychotic space. Various different weight gain propensities for the different agents at that point in time. And, I'm thinking of a clinician who sits down with the patient. They can give them what is possibly the most efficacious product, and they'll have a particular outcome. But they may look at that individual and say, well, this person is just started, dating, or they've started a job where they need to be more fit or whatever. If I give them, something like a clozapine or whatever, typically related to higher weight gain, you know, that's going to be an impediment for them. So I'm going to give them something different that is different on that scale. And that may not even be so that is all a conversation that has gone on within the psychiatrist's head before they open their mouth and say, well, what I would recommend is that maybe we start with this. Here's the rationale for it. I think it's going to be a good outcome for you. That conversation may never make it into a chart or any other way. And if you're using the outcomes for that patient to feed into something that is going to develop or iterate on those types of products, and I'm just using a really simple example here, but you're not necessarily capturing all the decisions and all the data that went into making those decisions that
Yes.
resulted in those outcomes. So it's a challenge. It's not direct in and out for that iteration, and I don't
No,
think we're a
and I
ways
think
away from that.
and I think the toddler example actually really emphasizes that. Now I think about it, right? So again, LeCun says, well, the kid wanders around and learns everything. The kid, and he makes this point, is getting very high definition video, sound, touch. And this is, I think it is a philosophical issue around AGI at the moment, that humans, we have a extraordinarily sensitive and real time set of inputs about the world around
Yeah,
us, right? If you compare that, to your point, to healthcare, we think we're all modern and everything, and I did a project once, and it made me think a lot about this. We're at such a primitive stage of monitoring humans, right? The fanciest thing we have is continuous glucose monitoring now, right? And my watch measures my heart rate. Of this incredibly complex body, that's it. Maybe some people's glucose gets monitored, right? And some people's heart rate gets monitored. The other things, which we can measure in a standard blood test, an aggressive not treatment plan, someone that gets like me gets that done once a year. I mean, think of that. Once a year. What a window that is. And get all my blood chemistry done once a year. It really needs to be, to teach an AI, it would have to be every second, right? I mean, whatever. So we're many, many orders of magnitude, both in terms of just the time sequencing of measuring, let alone the number of things we would measure. And until we have that, and we are a long, long, long way from that, I don't understand how that loop gets closed, right? It's just a lot. Big gap.
Yeah, well, I just quickly looked up what is the total addressable well, actually not the TAM, but just what is their overall revenue for just drug manufacturers? I say the top 20, and it's a trillion dollars for the top 20 biopharma companies. So it kind of does make sense why you would try to go after
Right.
that specific market, right? So if you want to be valued at $10 trillion, you get coding, you develop drugs, you develop
Right.
something else. I don't know what
If
else,
you
right?
could generate,
There you go.
a marker a day, and you could get $10 billion for that marker, right? You could have a business model which should be, I think, unlike any business model that's ever existed. That kind of would be it. The TAM calculations are insane if you are able to solve this very, very difficult to solve problem. And I get your point, Costas, about not sharing the information, but of course the flip side, and it's being used a lot, like why would we want AGI? Why do we want these things to be like completely much more brilliant than we are? The catchphrase now is because you're going to cure cancer. And you see the CEOs talk about it all the time. And it's difficult. You're doing the brave thing. It's difficult to get in the way of that argument, right? That lets them move through anything. It's like, Costas, don't you want to cure cancer? What's wrong with you, right? It's like, no, give us all your data.
Yeah, I've got a topic for next time, and we're just going to tease people to say the next one might be pretty interesting if you guys all agree. But I think there's a good discussion to be had around that, because I think what the tools that we're talking about here will really take us beyond just cancer. I mean, we may cure cancer, but it's at that what cost, right? So
great discussion.
Topic for another discussion. Yeah.
Absolutely. I very much enjoy spicy Costas takes on spicy version of Costas. So, hey, thanks a lot, everyone. I know we're right up against time. I don't want to take up more of both your time, Alex and Costas. Thanks you very much, everyone, for watching. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, please leave them down below. Thumbs up and like and subscribe to the channel, and let us know what you think about these recaps, because they are just happening fast and furious nowadays. Even these drug companies like Costas was talking about, conservative in the past, now not as much, right? Willing to take big bets, and the diagnostic side is moving super rapidly, and you have the big AI incumbents coming in now to try to like wedge their way in. So lots to talk about. But thanks a lot, Costas. Thanks a lot, Alex, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks, everyone.